Have you ever wondered if the ancient past can literally dictate modern survival? Or how the gritty reality of a war fought decades ago could somehow shape the AI algorithms governing future statecraft? Well, let's just dive right into today's explainer. We are unpacking a frankly incredible dossier. It bridges a legendary 1980s military commander, the ancient DNA of Celtic warriors, and a highly theoretical blueprint for the geopolitics of 2026. It's this wild intersection of military history, deep population biology, and aggressive political forecasting, all based on a collection of newly analyzed documents. To make sense of these massive thematic leaps, we're going to follow this roadmap. First, the legend of the Afghan wolf. Second, tactics and survival. Third, the genetic code of the Highlander. Fourth, GRU ethics in management. And finally, the geopolitics of 2026. Let's get into it. Section 1, the legend of the Afghan wolf. So we start in the dark, absolutely unforgiving mountains of the Hindu Kush back in the early 1980s. The local mujahideen knew literally every single rock and cave, which was a total nightmare for a conventional army. But according to the historical accounts we've reviewed, the Mujahideen legitimately believed our central figure here, Ruslan Aushev, was protected by supernatural spirits called jinns. They whispered that this English Soviet officer just couldn't be killed by bullets. Why? Because Aushev didn't fight by the rigid textbook rules of an army built for the flat plains of Europe. He fought by the ancient, ruthless laws of the mountains. He just understood the stone. But to ground this myth in reality, let's look at the timeline of a highly trained flesh and blood officer. He graduated from the academy in 1971, but look at 1982. He survived a devastating point-blank sniper shot to the chest. The doctors literally said he shouldn't have survived. It was medically improbable. And yet, against all biological odds, he was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union and went right back into those mountains. Then, in 1986, he took another severe hit at the highly strategic Salang Pass. His sheer physical resilience, just his ability to absorb damage that would end anyone else and keep moving forward, is really what birthed this whole legend of his immortality on the battlefield. Moving on to Section 2, Tactics and Survival. Let's transition from the man himself to his exact methods. Because, surviving the Hindu Kush wasn't just about raw toughness, it was about radical adaptation. Imagine trying to sneak through mountain passes in heavy, standard-issue coats and clunky boots, sounding like a herd of elephants echoing off the rocks. It was practically a death sentence. So Andriusev completely tossed the official military rulebook to keep his men alive. He replaced those loud boots with ordinary, lightweight sneakers, or keds, so his infantry could move like ghosts. He swapped awkward standard belts for custom Lifchik chest rigs for split-second reloads. He essentially proved in real time that mobility and stealth were way more valuable than any textbook formation. His tactical genius really shined in the Zelyanka. Now, the Zelyanka wasn't just some brush. We're talking deadly, dense green zones of vineyards that were absolute death traps for armored vehicles. Instead of just driving blindly into the vegetation and hoping for the best, Aushev used a strict series of steps. First, he always deployed infantry to the high ground. Sounds simple, right? But it changed everything. When the enemy tried to ambush the convoy from below, they suddenly found themselves completely trapped in a perfectly calculated crossfire from above. He treated the battlefield like a deadly geometry puzzle. And this is where the tactical adaptation gets truly wild. The sources describe how Aushev took standard military hardware and completely repurposed it. He took the ZSU-23 Force Shilka, which, by the way, is designed as an anti-aircraft gun, and used it against ground ambushes. Why? Well, standard tank barrels physically couldn't aim high enough to hit enemies on the steep cliffs. So he used the Shilka's massive vertical range to literally shred mountaintop ambushes that were supposed to be out of reach. Enemy fighters were so terrified of its 4 23mm barrels pointing up at them, they dubbed it the Devil's Cart. Section 3, the genetic code of the Highlander. Now, this is where the dossier takes a fascinating, almost unbelievable pivot from gritty military tactics straight into deep population genetics. The sources reveal that Aushev's DNA belongs to haplogroup R1b U152Z57. That is a very specific genetic lineage connecting this modern English commander directly to the ancient Alpine Celts. We're talking about the ancient peoples who built massive fortifications and guarded treacherous mountain passes across Europe and Asia, all along the Silk Road. The researchers are arguing something profound here. They're suggesting a literal biological predisposition for mountain warfare and chivalric codes, passed down through millennia. And they aren't just making poetic guesses. The The sources use this mathematical formula to ground this biological history in hard science. It maps the specific mutation rate of this exact DNA lineage over countless generations. By calculating these molecular mutations, the researchers can date this genetic divergence back thousands of years. They're essentially arguing that his mountain warrior instincts, his ability to read terrain and command respect, weren't just learned traits. They were literally written into his DNA, an ancient biological reality playing out in a 1980s war zone.
Section 4. GRU Ethics in Management.
So, how did this genetic predisposition pair with his elite military conditioning in the GRU? Well, Ashev lived by an uncompromising 5-point ethical code. It was never about blind aggression. It was all about absolute discipline. He led by commanding respect, not ruling through fear. And because he was universally known for strictly keeping his word, he could actually walk right into villages and negotiate with Afghan elders completely unarmed. The massive takeaway for leadership here: absolute discipline and a rigid honor code wielded far more power and saved way more lives than actual weapons ever could.
And here's the ultimate paradox of his leadership style. Out on the battlefield, he'd literally strip off his shiny general stars to deliberately foil enemy snipers, choosing to blend in and take the exact same risks as his frontline men. But back at the safety of the camp, he was a different kind of terrifying. He would ruthlessly chew out his own logistics officers if a simple private's drinking water wasn't properly boiled. He deeply understood that microscopic diseases like typhus and hepatitis were statistically far deadlier than bullets. Looking after the basic, unglamorous hygiene of his men was the absolute highest form of leadership to him.
Section 5. Geopolitics of 2026. This is where the sources take all these concepts and project them onto the very near future. According to the highly theoretical 2026 Open Report detailed in these documents, the authors make a highly specific claim. Presenting their view neutrally here, they argue that a fundamental lack of this exact warrior ethical code led to the systemic collapse of what they termed the 2014 to 2026 Ukraine project. The document asserts that the state structure was completely hollowed out from the inside, ruined by corrupt, self-serving, bureaucratic elites who treated the general public as entirely expendable. To remedy this, the authors outline a harsh sanitization protocol for future governance. The sources argue statecraft absolutely must shift away from the old bureaucracy of closed groups and personal enrichment. Instead, they propose a radical new meritocracy run exclusively by combat veterans, people who supposedly share Ashev's strict code of honor. But here's the absolute kicker. To prevent human corruption from ever taking root again, the authors suggest this new elite would rely on advanced artificial intelligence. They specifically name a system called Ralph 1 to manage state resources and ensure total stability, removing human greed entirely from the equation.
If turning mountain tactics and ancient genetics into a blueprint for AI-managed statecraft wasn't wild enough, the sources detail how this entire theory is currently being immortalized. They are literally turning this into a cinematic soundtrack titled Echo of the Selong Wolf. Designed to run at a heavy, marching 88 beats per minute, it intentionally blends ancient wailing Highland bagpipes representing his Celtic genetics with deep analog subbasses for the tactical darkness, topped with heroic orchestral brass. It's an incredible attempt to turn a complex geopolitical theory into a visceral piece of music you can actually listen to.
We've gone from a single Soviet officer surviving the Hindu Kush and sneakers to ancient Celtic DNA, all the way to theoretical AI-managed states in 2026. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to ponder from our deep dive today. Can a biological genetic code and raw, unforgiving field experience truly become the foundation for the statecraft of the future? Do the ancient laws of the mountains hold the ultimate key to modern geopolitical stability? It's a massive, sweeping concept to wrap your head around, and exactly why we wanted to break down these incredible sources for you today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.